Serenity Valley Stories invites you into the shadows. Like and subscribe for more tales that will haunt your nights. And now our feature presentation, Shadows in the Sierra. I always thought I knew these mountains. The Sierra Nevada had been my home, my sanctuary, ever since I could remember. Growing up in this wild expanse, I learned to respect the land, to understand its rhythms and its dangers. When I became a park ranger, it felt like a natural progression, a way to protect and preserve the place I loved. But nothing could have prepared me for what I encountered deep in the remote wilderness of Lone Pine. The day started like any other. My partner, Mike Harlan, and I were assigned to patrol a particularly isolated section of the park. There had been reports of strange animal behavior, livestock going missing, and unusual noises at night. Locals whispered about the Lone Pine Mountain Devil, an old legend that had been circulating for as long as anyone could remember. Most of us in the Park Service dismissed it as just that, a legend, a story to scare tourists and thrill seekers. But as Mike and I headed out that morning, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was off. The trail was long and winding, taking us through dense forests and along rugged cliffs. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the landscape. Mike, ever the skeptic, cracked jokes about the so-called mountain devil, trying to lighten the mood. I forced a laugh, but my mind kept drifting back to the stories, tales of a creature with wings like a bat, fangs as long as your arm, and a scream that could freeze your blood. I had heard the stories 100 times, but they never seemed quite so real as they did now, with the forest closing in around us. By midday, we reached a small clearing where we stopped to eat. The wind had picked up, rustling the trees and sending leaves swirling through the air. There was a heaviness to the atmosphere, a kind of oppressive silence that felt out of place in the usually lively woods. Even the birds seemed to have fallen quiet, their absence adding to the growing sense of dread. "Something's not right," Mike said, his usual bravado gone. He was a big guy, ex-military, the kind of person who didn't scare easily. Seeing him on edge only made the knot in my stomach tighten. "Maybe it's just the weather," I suggested, though I didn't believe it. The wind had an unnatural chill to it, biting through my jacket and making the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The sky had darkened with thick clouds, and the air felt charged, like the moments before a thunderstorm. We decided to keep moving, wanting to finish our patrol before the weather turned worse. The trail led us deeper into the forest, where the trees grew so close together that the sunlight barely penetrated the canopy. The temperature dropped, and the silence became more pronounced, broken only by the sound of our boots crunching on the fallen leaves. It was then that we heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. We both stopped dead in our tracks, ears straining to catch the sound again. It was faint, barely more than a whisper on the wind, but it was there. Mike's hand went to the rifle slung over his shoulder. "You hear that?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Maybe it's just a bear," I said, though I knew that wasn't true. I'd encountered bears before, this was different. There was a malevolence to the sound that made my skin crawl. We pressed on, more cautiously now, our eyes scanning the trees for any sign of movement. The growl came again, closer this time, and I could feel the vibrations in my bones. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to run, but years of training and experience kept me moving forward. We reached a narrow ravine, the trail winding down into the darkness below. The growling had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to press in from all sides. Mike motioned for me to stay close as we descended into the ravine, the walls of the canyon rising up around us like the jaws of some great beast. The smell hit us first, an overwhelming stench of decay that made my stomach churn. It was like nothing I'd ever encountered in the wild, the kind of smell that made you think of death and rot. Mike swore under his breath, his grip tightening on his rifle. We reached the bottom of the ravine, and that's when we saw it. The carcass of a deer lay sprawled across the path, its body torn open and half-eaten. The flesh was ragged and bloody, the bones cracked and exposed. But it wasn't the sight of the dead deer that made my blood run cold, it was the tracks around it. Large, clawed footprints were embedded in the soft earth, each one the size of a dinner plate. They were unlike anything I'd seen before, too big for a bear, too deep for a cougar. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, but there was no logical explanation. Mike crouched down, examining the tracks with a frown. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Before I could respond, the growl came again, this time so close that it reverberated through the ravine. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and trees and the oppressive silence. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A shadow darted between the trees, quick and fluid, too fast to be human. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I tried to follow it with my light, but it was gone as quickly as it had appeared. "Mike, we need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts to stay calm. He nodded, rising to his feet and backing away from the tracks. "Agreed. This isn't right." We turned to head back up the ravine, but we'd barely taken a step when the creature emerged from the shadows. It was like something out of a nightmare, a twisted amalgamation of beast and bird, with leathery wings that stretched wide, nearly blocking out the sky. Its eyes glowed with a sickly yellow light, and its mouth was filled with rows of jagged teeth. The smell of rot and decay intensified as it stepped forward, its claws digging into the earth with a sickening crunch. Mike didn't hesitate. He raised his rifle and fired, the sound echoing through the ravine like a thunderclap. The bullet struck the creature in the shoulder, and it let out a screech that pierced the air, so loud it made my ears ring. But the shot only seemed to anger it. The creature lunged at us, its wings flaring as it moved with terrifying speed. Mike fired again, but the beast was on him before he could get off another shot. I watched in horror as the creature's claws raked across Mike's chest, sending him crashing to the ground. Blood sprayed across the rocks, and his screams were cut short as the creature's jaws closed around his throat. I wanted to help, to do something, but I was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear as the nightmare unfolded before me. The creature tossed Mike's lifeless body aside like a rag doll, turning its attention to me. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of terror unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I knew I was next. My training kicked in, and I forced myself to move. I turned and ran, my feet slipping on the loose rocks as I scrambled up the ravine. The creature's screech echoed behind me, followed by the sound of its wings beating against the air. I didn't dare look back. I could hear it gaining on me, the flap of its wings growing louder, the ground shaking with each step it took. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but I pushed myself harder, driven by sheer survival instinct. I reached the top of the ravine, the forest opening up before me, and for a brief moment, I thought I might make it. But then something slammed into my back, knocking the wind out of me and sending me sprawling to the ground. I rolled onto my back, just in time to see the creature looming over me, its fangs bared, its eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger. This was it, I was going to die here, in this dark, lonely forest, just like Mike. But then, as the creature reared back to strike, something in the distance caught its attention. A sound, a flash of light, maybe something as simple as a gust of wind rustling the leaves. Whatever it was, it distracted the beast for just a second, but that was all I needed. With the last of my strength, I kicked out at the creature's leg, catching it off guard. It stumbled, and I used the moment to scramble to my feet and run. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away, had to survive. The forest blurred around me as I sprinted through the trees, the sound of the creature's pursuit growing fainter with each step. My vision was tunneling, my body on the verge of collapse, but I kept going, driven by the primal need to survive. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually, the sounds of the forest returned, the chirping of crickets, the rustling of leaves in the wind. The oppressive silence had lifted, and the sense of imminent danger had faded. I slowed to a stop, my chest heaving, and collapsed against a tree. It was only then that I allowed myself to look back. The forest was still and empty, no sign of the creature that had taken Mike and nearly claimed my life as well. The adrenaline that had kept me moving drained away, leaving me trembling and weak, every muscle in my body screaming in pain. I wanted to cry, to scream, to do anything to release the fear and grief that had been building inside me, but all I could do was sit there, gasping for breath, as the enormity of what had happened began to sink in. Mike was gone. My friend, my partner, ripped apart by something that shouldn't exist, something that defied explanation. And I had been powerless to stop it. The guilt hit me then, sharp and overwhelming. I should have done more, should have found a way to save him. But how could I have? What chance did either of us have against that? That thing? I didn't know how long I sat there, lost in the darkness of my thoughts. Eventually, the cold began to seep into my bones, reminding me that I couldn't stay here. I had to move, had to get back to the ranger station and report what had happened, no matter how insane it sounded. With great effort, I pushed myself to my feet, wincing as pain shot through my back and legs. Every step was agony, but I forced myself to keep moving, navigating through the darkened forest by memory alone. The trail was lost to me, but I knew these woods well enough to find my way back. Or at least, I hoped I did. The creature's presence lingered in the shadows, a constant, oppressive weight on my mind. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent my heart racing, convinced that it was coming back to finish what it had started. But the forest remained quiet, almost unnaturally so, as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. But eventually, the trees thinned, and the familiar sight of the ranger station's lights appeared in the distance, a beacon of safety in the darkness. I stumbled toward them, my strength nearly spent, and collapsed onto the steps, too exhausted to take another step. I don't remember much after that. Someone found me, another ranger, maybe, and helped me inside. There were questions, concerned voices, but they all blurred together in my mind. All I could think about was the creature, those glowing eyes, and the fact that Mike was never coming back. Days later, when I was finally strong enough to speak, I tried to tell them what had happened, what I had seen, but the words felt hollow, inadequate, as if no amount of explanation could truly capture the horror of that night. And even as I spoke, I could see the doubt in their eyes, the skepticism. They didn't believe me, not really. How could they? But I knew the truth, and it haunted me. Even now, as I sit here, writing this down, I can still feel its presence, lurking just beyond the edge of my awareness. The Lone Pine Mountain Devil is real, and it's out there, somewhere in the darkness of the Sierra Nevada, waiting. I survived that night, but a part of me will always be trapped in those woods, forever running from the shadows in the Sierra. Thank you for watching Serenity Valley Stories. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another scary tale. Share your thoughts in the comments below.